Welcome everybody to the first episode of the Engineering Consultant Life podcast. Hey Michael, how you doing?
I'm good, Usen. How about yourself?
Good. It's our first episode for the podcast. Finally made it here. How do you feel about it?
Nervous, but we're going to try to say something useful, yeah?
Okay, great. And I guess today we're talking about like an introduction to our career and how we got here, right?
That's right. Try to figure out, exactly how does a person come to a consulting or an engineering type professional career, what goes into making those little life decisions that get you to where you find yourself, right? Because some of us maybe got to a place and never really put a lot of thought into how we got there, why we're there, and where we're going to go from there. So it's important to actually examine and not just float through life, right?
Right. So I guess you can start by telling us how you actually got here, to as an engineer, what made you become an engineer, and let's talk about that some more.
So how far back do we want to go? Am I sitting on the psychologist sofa and going all the way back into deep childhood?
If you want to, we can. When did engineering actually become an idea in your head, and what actually made you decide to go actually down that road?
Yeah, no, I think it does go back, pretty far. I was one of those kids who I think my parents noticed at an early age, this guy is always building stuff with Legos. He does pretty okay in math class, so maybe I think it was really my mom tried to kind of seed that, when you grow up, you want to be an engineer. You don't want to be this, that, or the other. You want to be something like an engineer and, make all that money and do this, that, and the other thing. And I think that kind of implanted early and kind of stuck with me up until, high school, when it came time to start actually thinking about what do you want to do as a career. Again, I was good at the math and the sciences, and maybe I had a couple buddies or something who were also sort of leaning, we're going to go to engineering school, we're going to do this, and I just sort of, started leaning in that direction without a whole lot of specific guidance or pressure in that direction. It just sort of developed naturally. Maybe I had some sort of passing interest in news that was coming out in the time about, infrastructure is going to be a really big deal in the next 20 years, and there's going to be a lot of work in building roads and building bridges and doing all this stuff. And, maybe I spent some time sitting in front of the television with my dad on a Saturday morning, and he's got the Discovery Channel on, and you're watching all the shows about, superstructures and mega engineering projects, and all that sort of comes together, and you just kind of go, yeah, maybe it wouldn't be such a bad idea to go to engineering school and learn something about bridges. It was always a little bit vague, but I just sort of ambled down that path and, signed up for school at Georgia Tech when it came time senior year to start doing early college applications. And, when you're looking at the different major options, like I said, just all those little factors that came together and said, saw all this cool stuff on TV, saw this stuff in the news, maybe had a couple teachers, say some stuff that pointed me in that direction, and that's where I ended up. It's kind of not a very linear or linear path or anything that was very core or driving. So that's why I think it's interesting trying to examine it after fact, why didn't I decide to become a doctor or a astronaut or something else? I'm just here, and now I'm thinking about it. So what about yourself? Are you different in that respect?
My interest came from my dad. My dad's an engineer, and growing up, he had just, was a couple of years out of college, and was working in the industry and visiting job sites and stuff like that. And I was like a young kid, following him to his office and going to job sites, and it was like daddy's an engineer, and that's all I knew.
See, now that is fairly different than mine, though, right? Because neither of my parents were in a technical field. My mother works in automotive industry, kind of, I guess you'd call it some sort of middle management corporate office kind of role, and my dad has always been kind of like a small business owner, runs a landscaping company, does that kind of work. So I didn't have that direct connection. So it's interesting you actually having a father in the exact industry that you came up in. So that seems a little bit more direct. So did you have any sort of pressure, or let's say the more positive version, did you have any like kind of big influence from your dad trying to get you there? Or do you think it was kind of a natural, just, son trying to, or not to fall too far from the tree, or whatever the phrase is?
Yeah, there wasn't really a pressure from him. It was more of like he kind of exposed me, and I had to make the decision. I mean, like, I was up to the point where, like, I was growing up, I had Bob the Builder sheets, and that's how, like, determined I was. I was like, when I grow up, I'm going to be an engineer. I wasn't deviating from that, and I stuck with it. My mom, she was more of like the non-technical, and my dad was more of technical. So when I had any issues growing up and going through high school and I had problems with math, then I would go to my dad. If it was like social studies or geography or something else, then I would go to my mom. So that he never said, hey, you have to like make sure you pass your calculus so one day you can, become an engineer and go to engineering school and all that kind of stuff. Now, he didn't really put any pressure. He just said, oh, okay, you wanted to do this, and all right, then let's see how you go. And then I would come back from class and say, hey, this is where I'm at so far, and I'm definitely going to study engineering at school. So when it came time to go to college, I only applied to study engineering with the mindset that, hey, I'm going to engineering, to be an engineer. The only thing is I didn't know which kind of engineering I want to do. So which is, I guess we can talk about that as we go on and how we actually got into like our respective fields. So that's kind of like the story, the summary of like how I got exposed to like engineering per se and decided to like, stick with it. I just followed my dad, and going to school, being an engineer now, I can have like conversations with him.
Yeah, so it's got to be kind of a cool connection. You can talk shop, right? And he understands exactly what you do. So I'm curious, like when you were going around with your dad, seeing some of his job sites or going with him to the office, does anything stand out in your memory as like, oh, that one site was really cool, or I got my mind blown by the big construction equipment, or I liked seeing the dirt samples, or was there anything specific like that stands out, or was it just more general, I got exposed because my dad's an engineer and I kind of walked that path a bit? But
it just, so like growing up in Nigeria, like being an engineer is one of like a prestigious careers that you can have, so like alongside being a doctor. So it was just nice, the respect that, you get just by being an engineer,
Did you see him getting treated differently in public with that kind of title, or people knowing that he had that career?
Yeah, everybody, like, as long as you're an engineer, everybody refers to you as engineer, blah, blah, blah. Unlike America, where you're just like, Usen or
yeah, so Michael, it's kind of that equivalent of like, oh, I'm Dr. Smith because I'm a medical doctor. So I guess in Nigeria, it's a little bit more, hey, I'm Engineer Smith, right? Something like that. Right. So it's very public-facing identity.
Yeah, yeah. And also, like, the cultural aspect of it is, like, as a Nigerian, you want to, study something that's prestigious, So,
yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. So, that really was the main thing that I saw from it. Going to sites, I don't have any experiences memorable from going to sites with him because I was so young. I just remember going to his office, seeing his little nameplate on his desk that just had his name on there, and then engineer, blah blah blah.
So you just knew that when you grew up, you wanted a little plate with your name on it too.
Yeah.
Somewhere, somehow, someday.
I didn't know the details of what it was going to entail. I just knew that it involved a lot of math and going outside and building stuff. And I was like, I'll learn it as I go on. I didn't really know much about it, and I was like, I'll figure it out as I get on the journey of trying to become an engineer.
Yeah, and that makes sense. That kind of resonates because I kind of remember thinking like, okay, engineering, it's this sort of, seems to be this kind of thing where you can make new stuff appear in the world or kind of do important stuff in the world. Like I didn't have a really specific idea of what it meant to be a traffic engineer or a geotechnical engineer or any other kind of engineer or consultant or analyst or anything of the sort, but you just kind of think, well, these people have something to do with making giant skyscrapers, and giant skyscrapers are like half of how a city or a country builds its identity or something. So I think that just that prestige factor of being involved in something big kind of weasels its way into your subconscious.
Right. And as I got older, I realized, okay, this is what engineers contribute to society. So I was like, okay, so I can, know how to be involved in making our roads better, making infrastructure better in society. So having that in mind, I started naturally to navigate towards being a transportation engineer. So because I was like, okay, roads, in most third world countries or developing countries, like most people are trying to like develop infrastructure, roads, buildings, hospitals, schools. I was thinking more of like, okay, how do we develop our roads? So transportation engineering was like the first thing in my mind, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna, be a civil engineer, and I'm gonna specialize in transportation, and that was like my initial thought going into college.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense because you and I have a co-worker who's got a similar kind of story coming out of Africa like you do, right? Which he'd be great to bring on to a future episode and join us to talk about it specifically. But how are like Nigeria's roads and other pieces of infrastructure? Is it something that as a young man you really notice and go, man, I see these American movies or European movies, and then I look outside and it's wildly different? Or is it that kind of delta to where you're like, man, I really need to be a big part of this? Or is it a more subtle difference that you notice from one country to another?
It's a big difference in terms of like, how do we actually get these roads up and running and actually maintain, because of like, you can actually like construct all these roads but then how do you maintain them and come up with a program to maintain them? And then also in some other, rural areas, are you actually creating a network of roads to actually have access to get into all this other remote areas of the area or state or country? Or are you just only like selecting a few areas to like, make good roads on? So all those visuals of seeing like, hey, like, watching American movies or any other, developed country movies and looking at Nigerian roads, it's like, what can I do to like actually like develop that? And that was like my thought process at the time.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that'd be a really good thing that we ought to explore later on in depth, that kind of, contributing to a developing country that you come from and that kind of thing, that brain drain issue versus people that come back and actually go and take the knowledge and build something. But that's like a whole other 2-hour talk, I'm sure. So kind of getting back where we were. So you have this vague idea that you want to go do something engineering, something maybe transport. So now how do you decide, coming out of Lagos, Nigeria, where to go to college in the world? Because he ended up in America, and that's always a big step, I imagine.
Right. So yeah, for college, I ended up, doing like my associate's engineering at Columbus State.
And how'd you choose that school? How'd you even get it on your radar from 1,000 miles away?
I had family members that went there, and I used to visit the U.S. too, so I had visited the school and visited the campus. And
okay, so as a high schooler, you actually been to Columbus State?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, visiting the campus and having family around, it's good. You always want to be in an area where you have someone that you can or you can relate with. So having my family member around there kind of like helped. And and they had like a pre-engineering program too. So I was like, okay, I can get on board with that and start this civil engineering journey.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's interesting how those pieces come together. Where it's like, okay, Dad was an engineer, saw these things in, let's say, popular culture or media or just in the world around me, and then I happen to have a family member in this place and get connected to such and such a way, and all those little things kind of connect together and shove your life path in a direction without you really realizing it. So it's kind of interesting to see how that develops. So you become familiar with Columbus State. You realize, okay, that might be a step to getting me to this kind of forming goal of transport engineering. So what next?
Right. So I enrolled, then obviously when you have there's this program in Georgia called the Regions Engineering Program, and that's what I did, where you do our pre-engineering classes in one college, and then you transfer and complete the actual engineering degree in a different college. So after going to University of Georgia, that's where I completed my bachelor's of civil engineering degree. And then what actually made me, while I was still at University of Georgia, I also still was under the idea that, hey, I'm gonna do transportation engineering. But I had a co-op while I was at.
And what is a co-op?
Well, a co-op is an experience that you get while you're in college, where you get to like formally get trained in the industry, maybe like every other semester or one semester, and get experience in the engineering industry. That's the brief summary of what a co-op is. If you have any other definition of how you would describe it for our listeners?
No, yeah. I mean, that's pretty much the thing. It's like an internship that happens on repetition. So you get in with some company or some organization, and instead of just doing one summer semester in between your academics, you go to that same organization over and over again, 2, 3, or 4 times, alternating semesters, one on your internship, one on classwork. And so you just kind of work in like a full year's worth of working experience into your college degree program, so that when you come out the gate, you already have a year of work experience, whereas all of your compatriots maybe have a 3-month internship where they did maybe a lesser amount of real life work, and then they just have their academics. So it's supposed to kind of give you that boost up, that edge. So I was part of one of those programs as well, which is its own, little amusing story on my pathway, but we'll get there later.
Yeah, so I participated in a co-op at UGA, and by the way, I feel co-ops are very important, and all engineering students should at least participate in one semester of a co-op, if not a year. So while I did my co-op, I got a position at this geotechnical engineering firm, and while I was out there, I didn't know exactly what they did. I went to the interview, and they said, hey, we do all this work with geogrids, and I never heard of what a geogrid before. It just sounded straight, geo and a grid, and then it's a subset of like geotechnical engineering. I was like, I've never heard of that before. Then they asked me like, hey, have you taken soil mechanics? And I was like, nope, didn't know when I was even going to take that class. And fortunately for me, I got that co-op position, and I got introduced into like soil mechanics, learning about how soil interacts with like retaining walls and slopes, and actually why it's important, the friction angles and things like that, and then I went back to school after the first semester, and then I happened to take my soil mechanics class, and I was like, oh, okay, so this is what we're dealing with now in geotechnical engineering. And then from that moment on, I got interested in soils, in dirt.
So now, so you started out thinking you were going to be this road building guy. So did you find that this was a veering off from your course, or did it connect in some way that seemed like a logical next step? Did it raise a flag at the time?
No, initially it just seemed like a left turn from what I was trying to do. It didn't seem like there was any correlation between what I was looking to do now and what I wanted to do before. At the time, it just looked like a complete left turn. So after graduating, and even while I was in undergrad, I still had experiences in labs and other research in that particular field of geotechnical engineering. And I decided, okay, I'm going to stick with this and commit to it. And after I graduated, I was like primarily focusing on looking for like geotechnical engineering jobs. So that's kind of like the story of how like I started with transportation, made that left turn to geotech, and I'm still here. But the funny thing is, now in our geotech, like we do all this pavement stuff, which is almost related to transportation, which is like a transportation part of the geotech work. So to me, I feel like we almost came back full circle again with the transportation in terms of like me being interested in like roadway.
Well, that's right. Because for anybody that's listening that doesn't know, geotextiles or geogrids, as Usen was saying, are basically, a special structural fabric that you can use to make roadway supports stronger, the base material under a road stronger. If you're sitting on soft soil, I can put this little geogrid fabric on it, and now the road will have less of a chance of sinking into that soft soil. And then you get into the geotechnical world, and you don't build a road without knowing what soil is underneath it, and that soil data is vital to designing the roadway. So Usen might have had an idea that he was going into transportation design to make roads, but he just kind of accidentally stumbled into an area where you're doing some of the, let's say, the preliminary data gathering that goes into designing a road and effectively kind of achieving the goal that you wanted through a sideways path, which is kind of interesting, right?
Yeah.
Maybe in a way you don't quite expect. Because also for people not familiar with our field, when you want to get data about the soil underneath an existing road or a future road, it involves going to where that road is. So if I want to know what is underneath an interstate in the middle of Atlanta, Georgia, I have to take my happy self out to the interstate in the middle of Georgia with all those tractor trailers and fast cars and irresponsible drivers perhaps, and set up some cones and start digging holes. So you find yourself smack on the middle of the road that you were wanting to help build, and doing it in a very, very visceral kind of way. It's a different experience than maybe what you were expecting, which, again, takes us to another entire topic that we plan on covering in depth later, so bonus.
Yeah, but I'm really interested, like, since, like, for your story, like, did you know what part of engineering you were trying to of civil engineering you were trying to focus in when you were getting into college and getting out, or did it change just like mine, or was it just the same throughout the whole undergrad?
I guess senior year of college, I'm thinking I didn't have a super specific goal, nothing as specific as I'm going to work on roads. I maybe had an idea of, I want to be involved in some of these big infrastructure things I see on TV. I remember doing a lot of research. I would actually go and get on the U.S. Department of Labor's website, where they have data sets that you can go and look up, what do different jobs in pretty much any industry under the sun, what are their educational requirements, what are their earning prospects, what does the average worker make, or the top 10% earner in that industry make, and blah, blah, blah. So I was trying to narrow down, like, okay, what are some fields that are going to, maybe be a good return on investment, which is, maybe something that a lot of prospective college students don't always do. So that was like a weird thing in my head that I came upon, where I was like, I'm going to do some research and figure out what my salary might be for different jobs and this, that, and the other thing. But like I said, the civil engineering choice had a certain amount of arbitrariness to it, so that when I went to school, I very much was a generalist kind of student. I had no idea what specific thing I wanted to work on building, so I tried to take classes in a little bit of everything. I took some environmental, took some little tiny bit of soil or materials, took some traffic control, tried to make myself diversified because I didn't know where I wanted to go. I was trying to wait for opportunities to pop up, which can be a bit of a dangerous game, actually, because it's a bit of a paradox, I guess, where you want to hold opportunities open for the best thing to come along, but if you don't actually aim at something specific, you might end up with just kind of aimlessness. So that can be something that's important for people to think about as well. But yeah, so I kind of kind of took things as they came. And luckily, if you do kind of bumble through life a bit and keep your eyes open, you will see random opportunities pop up. So, it occurred to me early on the way that my college, Georgia Tech, was set up. You had a very wide array of courses available to you early on, and you could explore. They didn't really tell you, and here's the exact path you need to go down. You didn't have to choose a specialty early on. So, and I also realized, like, hey, I don't even have to take junior level courses. I can just start taking senior level courses if I feel like it. So I found like a specialized senior level class in air pollution, took that, and I thought that was kind of neat, learning about particle mechanics and aerosols and, oddball stuff like that I had never thought about before. But I kind of liked the idea of, doing something to maybe help get rid of pollution in the future. That seemed like a noble cause. So I asked that professor to sign me up to work in his research lab, and did that a bit as an undergrad, and ended up working for him as a graduate student later on. So that was kind of just one of those, random things that an opportunity that I saw and latched onto it and followed it until it didn't work for me anymore. And I go into that deeper perhaps later, graduate school and what that decision process is, and if it's a good decision for different kinds of people. But there was also a point where I got myself a co-op at the working for a city government, and that was its own interesting learning experience. That was a city government job in a water management department that ended up being a very strange experience, because my entire internship was mostly me sitting at a desk, staring at a computer, wondering if anybody was ever going to show up and give me an assignment, right? It was like this very odd situation where I kind of found out later that somebody in that department was basically hiring excess numbers of interns from our university to boost their credibility with that university. They were basically, hey, I'm an alumnus of Georgia Tech, and I'm going to hire all these interns so that I can go to the alumni board and brag about how much I am supporting their co-op program so that I can get a position on the board and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So my internship was a lot of sitting around and reading books, and I actually took a course on my lunchtime, back at Tech, to keep my keep my classes rolling, because I realized, oh man, this internship isn't really going anywhere, but I can still knock out a couple credit hours of academics. So it was a kind of an exercise, not so much in finding out what I wanted to do for a living as much as finding out what I didn't want to do, and it kind of soured my impression of what it might mean to work for a government office, which, not to speak poorly of all engineering government offices by any stretch, but that was just one of those life experiences that happened to, color my perception a certain way and steered me on a different path. And then later on, I had some, I guess, suboptimal experiences trying to be a, scientific graduate student researcher as a graduate student, and that sort of steered me away from academics, whereas I previously thought that would have been something that I would have liked, and it might have just been a function of, my relationship with a certain professor, or, my liking or not liking for the particular tasks that I was doing. I found out that I really don't like working with, strange to say for an engineer maybe, but I don't like working with machines. I don't like working with hardware. I don't really like getting my hands dirty. So setting up all this weird little air pollution equipment and setting it up on rooftops to collect data and messing with all the fittings and the pipings and the Teflon tape, it all just infuriated me. And so that was something I didn't want to do. So it kind of, helped me make another decision point and say, okay, I need to try to shoot for some sort of career where maybe I'm doing a bit less of this, but the universe is funny, and I kind of got the opposite, right? So when I got out into the job market, I graduated with my master's degree and, was putting out my resume. And again, here's a whole nother episode topic that we got to cover. What is this process of finding a job and networking and deciding where to apply and how to apply and all that stuff. But kind of the short story was I felt like I was not doing a good job of putting myself into the market because I did not get more than about 1 or 2 callbacks for interviews, even though I thought I had a relatively strong resume, right? I've got this master's degree, I've got a 3-point-something GPA from one of the highest rated engineering colleges in the land. But there were only a couple firms that seemed to want to bite, and then the job I happened to get was, you're going to work in soils and you're going to dig a lot of holes with your bare hands and get a lot of dirt under your fingernails, and good luck. Here you go, kiddo. So I ended up in geotechnical engineering very differently than you. I didn't even take any of those related classes in the major. I skipped geotechnical. It just didn't occur to me to take. I took more environmental or a couple other oddball things, so it wasn't really on my radar, but that was who had a need in the job market, and thus that was who found my resume, and I needed a job. They needed a warm body, and so I thus became a geotechnical engineer. So my path was very much unguided and a little bit like a pinball, just sort of bouncing into opportunities and obstacles and ending up in some sort of place. And my geotechnical experience has had its ups and downs. I guess I could say that I'm on an up right now, but there's a lot there to dig into as far as finding pathways and whether people get to a career by willpower and choice or versus happenstance. And I think there's just like a complete mix of the two in the industry. Most of the people you work with, if you ask them, how did you get here, especially the older guys, you'll get some very interesting stories because almost nobody's path is linear. If you're the kind of guy that or girl who studies something and then gets a job in that exact thing and you like it and you continue with the same company for 20 years with a linear progression, I think these days you might be a bit of an oddball. What do you think?
Right, yeah. I actually have a question. So for your journey so far, do you think that there were any other external factors that kind of help guide you as you made those pinball moves across the table to get to this point where you are? You think there's some external factors in terms of maybe people or just or you think it's just mere situation?
Yeah, obviously you get influenced by whatever people you happen to, come into their orbit. So it's like I said, I happened to take a class because I thought the title of the class was cool. Looking at the course catalog, didn't know much else beyond that. And then you take the class, and I liked the professor's first personality. He seemed like a cool guy, and he did a good job of delivering the topic. And so you say, oh, well, this might be a good thing because that guy seems to like what he's doing, so maybe I'll like it too. I think there's a lot of that because I've had the exact opposite experience where I took a thermodynamics class from a teacher who told us that he hated the subject on the first day of class. He was an acoustics researcher who was basically forced to teach thermodynamics because the school didn't have anybody else to teach that particular session of the class. And so he said, hey, look, guys, I don't like this class. You're probably not going to like this class because I don't like it, but we're all going to try to get through it. And I think that was might not be my only one, but it was my first D in college. And I've always been a 4.0 kind of student coming out of high school and early on in college. So, suffice to say that I had no interest in pursuing thermodynamics as a field of study after having a class given by a person who hated the topic. So much of it just depends on who pops up into your orbit and kind of exposes you to opportunities in a way that appeals to you or resonates with you. And there's a lot of chance in that.
Yeah, I agree because of even for me, for my story so far, even after graduation, knowing that I wanted to get a position within the geotechnical engineering discipline, it seemed like most of the jobs out there just kept wanting someone with at least a master's degree in that discipline, So then I ended up going in through CMT with this construction materials testing for our listeners, which is a service that's provided by most of our geotechnical engineering consultants around town. They all provide the construction materials testing. So when I applied to the geotechnical engineering job, and I was told, hey, I couldn't get that position. I figured, okay, my background in geomaterials testing in the lab at college might be something, similar to like construction materials testing. And I decided to go into that with like hoping that maybe sometime in the future, maybe I could change into that. Again, I'm doing that roundabout trip that we just talked about already, me going from transportation and then you coming with like environmental and then winding up here. And now I have to go take another detour. And I think what I can say is like, as I'm pretty sure you might agree to this as well, is as our journey has continued so far to where we are right now, everything hasn't really been exactly what it seemed like at first thought, going into it. Like, what do you think about that?
So are you saying that in the sense of it was not what it seemed, in the sense that it was not what you expected, like it was not the path you expected to follow? Or did you feel like you got tricked at some point along the way? Like, oh, you thought you were doing one thing and then you ended up doing another on accident?
Yeah, not like I got tricked, but I went into something not knowing exactly what it was, thinking it was something else, and then I was like, oh, this is totally not what I expected. I didn't expect, this would be this, and I would be disinvolved in digging holes or something like that, that kind of thing. So
yeah, and here's what's interesting too, because we started out the talk kind of posing the general question of something like, how does a person get to the point in their career that they happen to be at now? Because I think that this is perhaps part of what makes what we're trying to do with this podcast a bit different than the average podcast in this arena. I think most of what you might hear if you listen to some sort of podcast that's giving career advice, it's okay, we're going to talk to the president of this awesome company who has accomplished a million amazing things in their life, and they're going to tell you how awesome that was and give you some advice for how to get there. But what you might have noticed so far with our talk is that we haven't necessarily said, oh, look at us, we're both these very successful people who have gotten everything that we ever wanted and all of our dreams have come true, and here's how you can be like us. It's kind of more akin to, we are two people who are still on the middle of some sort of path trying to get somewhere, and how do you assess where you are, how you got here, and what it might mean in the future, right? Because I think, I guess if somebody was trying to anticipate our conversation, they might say, okay, they're about to tell us how, keeping your mind open for opportunities and taking them and letting them lead you places will do amazing things for you. But I don't know yet. It's one of those very philosophical things of, can you know if a person is truly happy before, their life is over, or do you have to wait till the end to assess it? Do you know if your career is successful and while you're in the middle of it? So where do you think we are so far in answering our question? What have we found out so far in terms of assessing one's career path trajectory, or figuring out how people get to where they are?
Well, so far it looks like there hasn't been any straight line where you go from point A to point B, and I think the career journey, it's going to be a function of like several factors, like from like your influences from like at home, like in my case, my dad, or, how your influence in terms of like your environment, where you grew up. There isn't going to be one straight. I mean, you might, like you said, you might have like a situation where you say, hey, I want to go into this particular field and try to stick with it. But are you really sure that you might stick with that? Because you don't really know what else you're missing or what could be more interesting to you down the road. And I feel like at every point in time, it seems like there has been something that kind of like piqued our interest at that moment and that we might not have thought about. And as our journey into like seeking, I guess, a career, we kind of discover that, okay, maybe I want to make this turn. So I think I would describe it as the how do we get here as a journey with like turns, a bunch of lefts, a bunch of rights, a bunch of ups and downs, and you're just trying to navigate it to get to some image of success. And like you said, we're still on that journey. We're still going there, and we'll know, I guess, when we get there. But there's going to be a bunch of different turns and lefts, rights, ups and downs during this journey. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and what's interesting, what comes to mind for me, especially because you said something to the effect of, at different points in your trajectory, maybe something piques your interest at that moment, right? So there's this idea that I picked up listening to a different set of shows on kind of psychology, where they were talking about this notion that obviously having some sort of aim, some sort of goal is better than having no goal. But it might be the case at any given point in your life, you don't know what your ultimate goal is. You don't know what your highest good is. But if you notice yourself having a natural interest in something at any point in your life, you might want to say, okay, I'm interested in that now. And even if that doesn't end up being the thing that ultimately interests me forever, it might get me a little closer to that which would interest me forever, right? So it's like, okay, if I am this high schooler who has a vague interest in math, science, and building things, and you say, well, I'm going to try engineering. Now, it might have been that you would have had a better run as a physics major, but you have no way of knowing outside of stepping out of the multiverse and looking at all your different, possible selves. It's like you try engineering. And then maybe as an engineer, if your true passion, your true ideal that you've not discovered yet is physics, you'll find your way there. Or maybe you'll keep ping-ponging towards something that is in common with engineering and physics that you haven't even thought of yet. So it's like, all right, I had this interest in math. I picked engineering school. I got to engineering school. Something about air pollution studies piqued my interest, and it could have been that I was interested in the particulate physics, or it could have been that I was interested in the kind of noble notion of helping save some sort of environmental crisis, global air pollution problem and improving people's lives. And, you keep kind of bouncing back and forth and figuring out, what are these little things that my interests have in common that they're leading me to, and keep aiming that direction. And every time you have a sub goal, you really shoot hard at it, kind of as if it was your ultimate goal. And then if at some point you lose interest, that's okay. What's interesting you now? And then shoot in that direction with determination, and that might take you somewhere useful.
Yeah, because of like, when you think about it, I feel like I had a bunch of classmates as well who, and I'm pretty sure there are a lot of college people potentially that listen to our podcast, hopefully, and they might not know exactly what major they want to do. They might know they want to do engineering, but not exactly if it's civil, mechanical, or they might even just be like, what about if I wanted to do business, but I kind of I'm good with math, and how would you, and I think having that mindset of like a goal and knowing like, okay, I can navigate this journey somehow, and being open to like take those lefts and turn and rights, like you're saying, might be a good way to like navigate that career choice and how to actually determine what career you're trying to get to.
Yeah, and so now with that in mind, I'll ask you this way. So having spent, whatever it is, let's say the better part of a decade on some sort of trajectory from, finishing out high school, getting to college, getting on some sort of path at a particular kind of company in a kind of industry, have you maintained a similar goal? Like, is your current, sort of high level goal still something like, I want to be an engineer who plays a big role in road work? Or have you started to see any other kind of goal, whether it's a lateral move or a higher level goal, emerge based on your different experiences?
Oh, definitely, because I feel like I've been getting exposed into so many so much stuff in our fields that I'm like, oh crap, I can do this, I can do that. Oh man, like what am I gonna do now? Like there are things that I wasn't thinking of when I was in college or when I was in high school.
So do you want to give any specifics, or can you summarize at high level? Like what would you say is your new goal or some potential goals that you could see that have come out of striving for traffic engineer expert?
Yeah, like now I'm like, do I just want to only focus on pavement stuff or traffic stuff? Because now I'm thinking, like, I want to try something else and see if I like that better, and then maybe if not, then I could do that. So maybe like buildings and more of like deep foundation stuff is what I'm kind of craving now, actually.
So you think so that's interesting. So maybe you have spent a little bit of time in the workplace and just maybe shifted the interest of your kind of technical passion. So you might still have an interest in, I want to be, this like talented engineer who works on cool projects, but maybe just a different kind of cool project. Is that kind of right for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's fair enough. It's a little bit different for me, right? Kind of the weird array of experiences that I have led to sort of these more, I guess, ethereal realizations about myself, where it's, I'm interested in the technical things that we do, but I find that as you go through a career, if you kind of think about what you're doing outside of just the literal description of your job, like, okay, I am doing soil explorations, and of course I'll ask our listeners to bear with us a bit if we get to talking a little shop about the specifics of what we do at any point during the podcast. We want this to be applicable to pretty much any young professional in any career. I guess bonus points if you accidentally learn some super specific facts about what we do in geotechnical and traffic engineering. But so as I've gone through my path being a environmental engineer, a soils engineer, a pavement engineer, I have kind of found I've had these other opportunities of, I also get a kick out of helping new employees learn how to do a certain task. So maybe there's this aspect of me that's not just Mr. Technical Mathematic Engineer, but maybe there's a teacher aspect of me, or I like running a project as opposed to doing a project, if that makes sense. So there's that, maybe I have this goal that might emerge of being some sort of leadership role or managerial role, or dealing with the people that are either in our company or the clients. And maybe that's where I need to start steering, right? So I kind of see that new interest emerging, that following this technical path has led me so far, and maybe my interest wanes and I'd rather actually have my activities defined by helping teach and lead other people to be awesome at that technical thing, and then I can get my fulfillment out of doing the teaching and the leading or what have you.
That's great. And do you mind sharing like the experiences that you've had that made you come to that realization? Because I say it's great because of essentially during your career you want to do stuff that gives you fulfillment. You don't want to just do things just out of like doing just to do it. You want to do something that you feel and know that you feel fulfilled. And obviously, like in our business, like most people want to go either technical or managerial route, and I think it's like, how do you know or get to that realization where you actually realize that this is what I'm interested in doing, as opposed to like just doing the actual work instead of managing the work.
Yeah, and I think it can be tricky for kind of your underlying or latent passions, let's say your latent skills and passions, to reveal themselves unless there's something that pops up that I guess kind of allows it to emerge or forces it to emerge. So I guess I had the benefit of having wider interests outside of my academics and kind of technical education. So like in college, I picked up kind of spur of the moment. I stepped into a martial arts class that was offered on campus, and that was a fun way for me to get exercise. I'd previously done some team sports as a young kid or a teenager, played some soccer or whatever, but that was something that martial arts class really kind of drew my attention, and that that's its own whole, I guess it's a whole other podcast really, let alone just an episode of ours. Because I could probably talk for hours on that too, but kind of long story short is I have this fun new hobby that I'm pursuing while I'm in engineering school, and I guess just in that environment realized that, oh, there's this cool opportunity where if I can, keep training in this martial arts system and I can become a instructor, that appealed to me just on a natural fundamental level. I didn't have to think about it or be convinced of it. I was just like, oh yeah, I want to do what that guy's doing at the front of the classroom. I found that I liked speaking, I liked teaching, I liked delivering material, I liked helping make complex material easy to understand for people, whether it was, trying to do some, crazy cool move with your body, or helping somebody in my classes, learn how to solve some sort of physics problem or something. So it's like, oh, I start noticing this pattern in myself that I enjoy helping other people learn. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, I'm going to quit my engineering path and go sign up to be a teacher, in a school. You don't have to follow that literal, diversion. What I kind of started to do was realize, oh, I'm really having a fun time teaching as an extracurricular activity outside of work. So how can I bring that into work? And it might be kind of hard to do in your first couple of years on the job, because nobody wants a first year out of college junior engineer teaching anybody anyway, or anything. They have no business, teaching. You're trying to learn your job. So, but you stick with it for a few years, and I found that, after 3-4 years of being on the job, I've absorbed enough knowledge that even though I'm still not necessarily, a decorated veteran of the engineering industry with deep knowledge in all sorts of areas, I have the ability to pass the basic level of information of here's how you do your job, here's the basis of what we do. And as I get the opportunity to teach younger employees how to do their jobs or what it is that we do as a company, that kind of feeds that little need, that teaching need, right? So does that kind of make sense? So I can start sort of drawing from my outside experiences and figuring out how to combine them with what I'm doing professionally to make my professional activity kind of more true to myself, I guess.
Right. So like if you were a student, like I guess the first thing that you would be given as an advice is like saying, hey, like notice yourself. Are you the guy that, likes to be the center of the group project and doing the actual, managing your partners to get everything put together for the presentation? Or are you the guy that everyone like relies on doing all the calcs and analyses and everything? And that might be a good basic way to kind of like start giving you an idea of like potentially what you might be looking at that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
For the future.
Because if I think back to, being in my classes at school, I remember having these funny little negotiations with people on projects where you'd have, okay, we've got this semester-long project assignment. It's going to involve a lot of calculations. It's going to involve some drawing, schematics on AutoCAD. We're going to have to write a report. We're going to have to do a presentation, or maybe some sort of like mock client interactions if you're on like a big design project for your senior level classes. So I would notice, you might pick out one guy in your group who seems to be kind of shy, but he's really interested in just crunching the numbers, right? So you say, hey, Rob, I kind of noticed that, or I heard you saying you didn't really look forward to doing the presentation, because a lot of people have that inherent stage fright, that fear of public speaking. And I say, I'm capable of doing the calculations, but if that's something that you really like to do and you would rather me take on more of the presenting and report writing and dealing with the kind of language arts aspect of the project, then I'll be happy to make that trade, and we can both be doing something that we enjoy. So maybe you start noticing like, oh, if you're the guy that wants to give the presentation, or the lady who wants to give the presentation, maybe that's where you should aim your career. You want to be that client-facing person, or maybe that salesperson, or that manager, if you just kind of like, keeping the project organized while everybody does their more specific tasks. There's something to be said for that. And if you're that person who likes to just put your nose to the grindstone and bang out a bunch of calculus equations and write code and put together the schematics, well, that tells you something about yourself too. You want to go down a technical expert level path. And that's very valuable to know early on so that you can shoot in that direction.
Right. And I think since we're talking about like how we got here and career journey, I think another thing to mention is mentors. Because if you're a young engineer in college and you have, someone maybe like an alumni or something, I think having a picture of like someone in a position that you might be striving to shoot for at that time, because of obviously when you graduate, your desire might change, as we've talked about so far. So I think having that is beneficial, because even for me, that was one of the pivotal things that I did so far in my career up till now, was like having someone that I could kind of like talk to and say, hey, this is where I'm at, and this is where I want to be.
All right, so tell me more about that. Who's that person? Not, let's not name names, but what kind of mentor are you talking about? Is this like a formal mentor that you found? In what way? Like, who is this person?
Yeah. I found them through our I guess civil engineering mentorship program for the ASC,
which is the American Society of Civil Engineers, so a professional organization, kind of a networking lobbyist type organization. Yep.
Right. And I pretty much had looked up people in the geotech arena, that those were going to be my candidates for like mentors, and found some people who kind of did a couple of things, kind of like in the like, okay, you do geotech work, oh, you do this other thing that I've never heard of, and I think that's interesting. I think I want to like know more about you.
Okay, so you connect with this existing professional in the field that you're kind of aiming towards. So how did that help you determine your career path, or how has it helped you or influenced you, let's say, along the way?
Oh, because of now you're relying on someone who's been where you're at, and they can help you and prevent you from making certain mistakes that they might have made in their time. So they know how to navigate the industry. Like, hey, within this time frame, this is what you need to know. If you're trying to be in a managerial track or technical track, this is what you need to be doing to get to that position or level that you're striving for. If you're, and basically someone that's keeping you accountable for your, I guess, what you should be striving for technically, and learning, making sure like you're technically improving every year or every moment as you get on different projects. You just have that individual who can be like a compass, like a guide, just to like help you, direct you in your career. And I think so far having that person has helped me make decisions that I might not have. And sometimes, you don't agree with everything everybody says, but it's a good thing to have that third view, or a second perspective, if you want to, depending, more, you can have more than one mentor.
Oh, that's right. That's what I want to say, is it's probably something to think about, to either have multiple mentor type figures, whether it's a formal stated, I am your mentee, you are my mentor relationship, or at least to be grabbing advice from a few different people. Because I feel like there's probably that slight chance of a risk of you pick your one mentor, and then maybe they have a certain perspective because of something that's gone wrong in their career that doesn't apply to anybody, and you could get yourself, your opinion colored in a certain way. But I like the way you said that you have that person maybe as some sort of a, let's say like a check against what you're thinking, as at least another perspective that you can chew on, and you might decide, nah, I appreciate your opinion, but that actually helped convince me to take the opposite path of what you're suggesting because I chewed on what you said. Or they might be able to say, no, young man, this is really something you ought to think about. Don't do that. I can promise you that's going to, turn out poorly. And there's probably a mix of both of those interactions. So like I've not done the same as you in terms of finding like a formal mentor. It's, always been of interest, but I guess I've never pursued it and never had it pop up. I've always just tried to find somebody competent near me, maybe to kind of, air my grievances to and see what kind of commentary they might have. So, I mean, as a younger engineer at my first job, I kind of found myself, every now and then being like, oh man, maybe I don't know what's going on at this job and I don't know how to do my job, and my actual boss isn't giving me the kind of guidance I need. So I just kind of wander into somebody's office who I've found, for whatever reason, I trust them. They seem like a cool person or somebody that's going to be open-minded, and I can go and just sort of, blow off some steam and complain about what's going on, and then they take a bit of pity on me and actually, start teaching me some stuff, even though I didn't directly ask, can you show me the ropes? I just walked into their office and said, I have no idea what's going on, and our boss is a jerk, and, this job is crazy, and they say, okay, slow down, here's maybe what you need help with. And so kind of garner advice that way sometimes when I was starting out.
Yeah, and then you develop an informal mentor relationship somewhat. Yeah,
maybe on accident, and then it turns to something more traditional. But so anyway, let's see if we can summarize. So if you were going to wrap up this entire discussion, we might have meandered a bit, but if the initial question was, how do you get to where you are, or how did you get to where you are? Because it's not so much, like I said, we're not really at the point where we have any business maybe telling people, oh, here's how to be successful, but we certainly can shed some light on how do you assess where you are, what is the value of looking back at how you got to where you are. So what do you think the summary of that is? What are your maybe closing thoughts for why is it worth it to assess how you got to where you are, and what can you learn from that, and then what can somebody take away from that when they're applying it to themselves?
Well, looking back to like assess how you got to where you are and where you are right now is very good, because of it kind of like keeps you in track to make sure like, hey, this is what you thought you were trying to do, and this is where you are, this is where you're trying to go, and reminds you about, like, it kind of reminds you on what the goal is. So I would say in summary that the choosing your career isn't necessarily going to be as straightforward as you think. You're going to have to be open-minded, be willing to make a bunch of lefts and rights, listening to other people's opinions, and assessing the situation on your timeline at different events in your life, and assessing, hey, 1 year, okay, where was I trying to be? Where am I now? Am I happy with it? And as you mentioned, fulfillment. Fulfillment is very important. So what am I doing to get to that ultimate fulfillment that I'm seeking career-wise? And being open to make those shifts, lefts or right turns as necessary during the journey. And obviously, like, I don't know if so far if we've made the best decisions or not. So far I can say that looking back, I'm like, okay, I'm happy that certain decisions were made, and we're looking at the trip up to this point, and we're saying, okay, we need to continue to be open-minded, because of potentially something could change, and you might want to reroute to a different track or something. But just being open-minded so far is what I think I would summarize as your career journey.
All right, so being open-minded, that makes sense to me. And I think my takeaway from kind of examining my own path for the last half hour or however long we have been doing this is something to the effect of listen to yourself in terms of what resonates at any given moment, and regardless of what might be resonating at that moment, have some sort of goal that takes you somewhere higher than wherever you are now, right? So if you're a high schooler and you don't know what you want to be, get a degree. Doesn't matter what degree necessarily, because having a education or an education is better than not. Once you're there, figure out which classes sound cool. When you look at the menu of classes, take them. See which ones actually resonate when you do that. Figure out which professors are saying stuff that interests you or that present themselves as people that you might want to be kind of like in the future, and just sort of keep setting new goals in front of you based on what seems right at the moment and see where that leads. Does that sound fair enough?
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah.
All right. So I think on this little show that we're trying to do, the Engineering Consulting Life podcast, we're just going to keep diving into some of these little topics, these questions that somebody might ask. How do you get to where you are in your career? How do you get the most out of your education once you find yourself in college, or once I'm at a job? How do I get the most out of a given experience? So we can start digging into the subtopics that, we kept wanting to meander into. So,
right. Right.
What do you think we're going to be talking about next time, Usen?
Well, we talked about how we got to where we're at now, so I guess we can talk about what we do while we're at, and just continue from there. Or I guess if listeners have anything that they want us to talk about, they can comment also.
That's right. So listeners, let us know after hearing our little ramble here, our little dialogue. If anything struck your fancy that you want us to go deeper into, or if there's something that you want us to talk about. We are both engineers, we're both consultants, we're both young professionals who are still trying to find our way in the world and perhaps have just enough life experience to help the guy behind us, if that makes sense.
Right.
Let us know what we can do to help. And I think that'll pretty much settle us up for tonight. So Us and I have had a good time with this first chat, and I hope that we have a whole lot of others like it that people find interesting and useful.
Yeah. So we'll see you guys. Thanks for joining us on our first episode of the Engineering Consultant Lifestyle
Podcast.
Well, life podcast. Yeah, I'll get used to it. And we'll see you guys next time.
Goodbye.